Immediate family only. That's the whole text. 4 words, sent on a Tuesday afternoon while I was standing in my own kitchen holding a colander of green beans. Not a phone call, not even a full sentence with my name in it. Just those 4 words, and a period, like she was closing a door and wanted me to hear the latch. I didn't cry. I set the colander down on the counter, very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to feel like they belong to someone else. I looked at the water still running in the sink, and I thought, 31 years old, and she still doesn't understand what those 2 words are going to cost her. Immediate family. I stood there long enough for the beans to go cold. Then I turned off the water, dried my hands on the dish towel Walter's mother gave us in 1986, and I did not answer the text. Not because I didn't have words, because I had too many, and none of them were going to fit in a phone. I want to tell you what I did instead, but first you should know who I am and what immediate family actually meant on paper in that house. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and for 34 years I worked in title and escrow, which is a fancy way of saying I read deeds for a living. I sat across a desk from people on the best day of their lives and the worst day of their lives, and I watched over and over how much of what people call family is really just paper wearing a nice sweater. Who owns what, who signed what, who's listed, and who isn't. I retired 6 years ago. My husband, Walter, died 2 years after that. Heart, sudden, on a Sunday, in the orchard he'd been walking every morning since he was a boy. He didn't leave me much in the way of drama. He left me a house, a truck that still smells like him if you get in fast enough after it's been parked in the sun, and 40 acres of apple trees his grandfather planted, with a barn on it big enough to hold 300 people comfortably. That barn has hosted every family gathering for 26 years, every Thanksgiving, every graduation party, every 4th of July that didn't get rained out. And as of 11 months ago, it was booked, free of charge, family rate, meaning nothing, for my daughter Claire's wedding. My name is the only one on the deed. I want you to hold on to that detail, because it's going to matter a lot more than either of them thought it would. Claire is my only daughter. Her father used to say she came out of the womb already negotiating, and for most of her life I thought that was a compliment. She's sharp, she's capable. She's the kind of woman who can plan a wedding for 240 people with the calm efficiency of someone running a small hospital. I used to be proud of that. I still am, some days, if I let myself be. She's marrying a man named Ryan, who is pleasant enough, in the way that furniture is pleasant enough. He doesn't say much. He agrees with whoever spoke last. And standing very close behind him at every single family event for the past year has been his mother, Deborah. Deborah likes to be called Mrs. Voss by people she's just met. Deborah has opinions about seating charts, floral budgets, and, I would learn, guest lists that specify in writing exactly which mother of the bride qualifies as immediate. I didn't understand any of that yet, standing in my kitchen with cold green beans. I only understood the 4 words, and I understood, the way you understand weather coming, that this had been decided without me somewhere I hadn't been in the room for. That night I didn't sleep well, not because I was raging, because I was doing arithmetic. 6 years earlier, the Christmas of the year Walter died, Claire brought Ryan to meet the family for the first time. Deborah couldn't make it. A scheduling conflict, Claire said. I made the ham the way Walter liked it, the way I'd made it every year of our marriage, and halfway through dinner, Claire leaned over and said, quietly, so only I could hear, maybe next year we do something a little less traditional. Ryan's family does things differently. I said that sounded nice. I meant it, mostly. I didn't know yet that differently was going to become a permanent address. The summer of 2019, we did a version of Christmas in July at the orchard, all of us, including Deborah for the first time. She walked the property like she was appraising it. She asked me, in front of everyone, if I'd ever considered doing something more with all this land, a wedding venue business maybe, since I clearly wasn't using it for much. I told her I used it plenty. She smiled the smile of someone who'd already decided I was wrong and didn't need me to agree. The following spring, Claire got engaged. I found out from a photograph on the internet before I found out from my daughter. She called 2 days later to apologize for the timing, not for the sequence. I told her it was fine. It was not fine. But by then I had learned that saying so out loud only ever cost me more than it bought me. Then came the wedding planning itself, which is its own kind of pattern. The kind you don't see clearly until you lay all the pieces on the table at once, the way I eventually did, on my kitchen table, with a legal pad and a pen, 3 days after that text. I was asked for the barn. I was not asked for opinions on flowers. I was asked to write a check for the caterer's deposit, $12,000, just until the joint account clears, Claire said, and I wrote it, because that's what mothers do, and because some small, stubborn part of me still believed that money was the same thing as belonging. I was not asked to help choose the officiant. Deborah's pastor, from Deborah's church, in a town I've never once been invited to. I was asked, twice, to keep the property looking nice before the big day, mow the far field, trim back the hedges along the drive, as if I were staff being briefed on turnover. I was not on the list for the rehearsal dinner. Ryan's family, Claire explained, wanted something intimate. There was one more, and it's the one I keep coming back to, because it's the one where I first should have said something out loud instead of just filing it away. 8 months before the wedding, Claire and Ryan came to the orchard for a Sunday dinner, and Ryan mentioned, almost offhand over the pot roast, that his mother had already started referring to the property as the Voss family venue in emails to the florist. I laughed because I thought it was a slip of the tongue. Claire didn't laugh. Claire looked down at her plate and changed the subject to seating charts. And I let her, because that's what I'd trained myself to do for 31 years. Let the subject change and call it keeping the peace. Each one of those, on its own, is a small thing. A woman could tell herself any one of them meant nothing. I did tell myself that, for months, one small thing at a time. It's only when you stack them, Christmas, the appraising walk through my orchard, the engagement I learned about from a stranger's phone, the check, the mowing, the dinner I wasn't invited to, that you see it isn't a season of bad luck, it's a pattern. And patterns, in my experience, don't correct themselves. They escalate, quietly, until somebody finally reads them out loud. That's not cruelty, by the way. That's honesty with a handle. A lot to be fair to Claire, because I raised her to be fair, and because this isn't a story about hating my daughter. It's a story about a woman who forgot, somewhere in the last 3 years, that her mother was still standing in the room. 2 weeks after the text, I was at the grocery store on a Thursday morning, the kind of ordinary Thursday you don't remember until it becomes the hinge everything else swings on. I was in the cereal aisle, of all places, when I heard Deborah's voice 2 aisles over, on the phone, not lowering it the way people do when they think no one who matters is close enough to listen. Well, obviously Margaret's not going to be up front. It's not that kind of ceremony. Claire agrees. She said her mother's not really a wedding person anyway, so it works out. I stood very still with a box of oatmeal in my hand. And once they're married, that land is basically Ryan's problem to figure out. She's got no other family up there. She's what, 70? She'll want help with it eventually. We just have to be patient. I put the oatmeal back on the shelf. I don't remember choosing to do that. My hands did it on their own. That wasn't even the worst thing I heard in that aisle, but I'll come back to that. I left the cart where it stood and I walked out to the car and I sat there for 11 minutes without turning the key, not crying, counting. I counted the years I'd kept that orchard mowed and taxed and insured on a fixed income. I counted the Christmases. I counted the $12,000. And somewhere around minute 8, the hurt finished turning into something else, something colder, and a great deal more useful. I'm not angry. I'm simply done. I want to pause here and say something directly to you, because if you're watching this, some part of you already knows exactly what that parking lot feels like. Maybe it wasn't a wedding. Maybe it was a will, or a holiday table, or a phone call that never came. But you know the particular cold stillness of realizing you've been quietly rezoned from family to inconvenience. Stay with me. This is where it turns. That evening, I did not call Claire. I called a man named Arthur Pell, who had been my attorney for 11 years, ever since Walter's estate needed settling, and who still, out of old habit, calls me Mrs. Doyle, even though I've told him 100 times he can just say Margaret. I need you to pull the file on the orchard, I told him, the deed, the insurance, and anything I ever signed or didn't sign about the wedding. You didn't sign anything, he said. After a pause, I could hear him doing arithmetic in. I remember. You mentioned it in passing back in the spring. I told you should get something in writing if 240 people are going to be on your property. You said you'd get to it. I never got to it, I said, which means there's no lease, no license, no liability waiver, nothing. Correct. So the barn is still just mine, sitting there, with nobody having any legal right to be on it at all. There was a small silence, and then, in the driest voice I have ever heard a man use, Arthur said, "Margaret, I have been waiting 11 years for you to ask me a question like this." I brought him a folder 2 days later, the original deed from Walter's grandfather, transferred to Walter, then solely to me after he passed, notarized, recorded, clean as a whistle. I'd kept it in the fireproof box in the hall closet since the funeral, the way you keep the papers that matter most where you can find them fast, in case a day ever comes when you need to move quickly and think clearly at the same time. Arthur laid it out for me the way he lays everything out. No wasted words, no drama, the kind of calm that made me trust him in the first place. You can revoke access to your own property at any time for any reason, up to and including the day of. You don't owe anyone an explanation. If a caterer or a rental company has a signed contract with the bride or groom that references your property as the venue, and you were never a party to that contract, that's between them and the vendors, not your liability and not your problem to solve. My advice, if you want it, notify the vendors directly, in writing, that the property owner has not authorized use of the premises. Do it early enough that it isn't a surprise to anyone but the people who should have asked. I'm proud of you for finally doing this the right way, he added. And I'll admit that landed somewhere soft in me, because it had been a long time since anyone had said those particular words to me and meant it. I sat with that for one more night, not because I had any doubt, because some decisions deserve one quiet dinner alone at the kitchen table before you make them permanent. That night, I took out the box where I keep Walter's things, his watch, his reading glasses, and a letter he wrote me the year before he died, the kind of letter a practical man writes when he's thinking about a future he might not be in. I don't read it often. I read it that night. Margaret, if it ever comes down to the land, keep your name on it. Keep your name in the room. People forget who's holding the deed until the day they need you to remember. Don't let anybody talk you out of your own signature. W. He always did know how to say a thing in 4 sentences that most people couldn't say in 40. I put the letter back in the box, and I slept better that night than I had in 11 months. Friday came gray and steady, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as important. I made coffee. I called Arthur at 8:15 and told him to send the letters. There were 5 of them, each one identical in tone, calm, factual, entirely without heat. To the caterer, to the rental company supplying the tables and the string lights, to the florist, to the efficiency coordinator, to the wedding planner Claire had hired, a young woman named Priya, who, to her credit, called me directly within 2 hours, sounding genuinely rattled, to ask if there had been some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I told her. I'm the sole owner of the property at 4 Orchard Line Road. No lease or license was ever executed for the event scheduled there on the 14th. I'm formally notifying all vendors that the premises are not authorized for use on that date. I'm sorry for the short notice on your end. It isn't short notice on mine. I've had almost a year to be asked properly, and I wasn't. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I understand completely, Mrs. Doyle. For what it's worth, I did ask back in the spring whether the property owner had signed off on anything. I was told it was handled." I thanked her for her honesty. I meant it more than she probably knew. There's a particular kind of calm that comes over a person once a decision is actually made rather than merely felt. I want to describe it to you because it doesn't get talked about enough in stories like this one. Everyone wants the anger, the confrontation, the door slamming shut. Nobody talks about the quiet in between. I made myself a second cup of coffee. I watered the plant on the windowsill that Walter gave me for our 30th anniversary, the one I always forget until it's nearly too late. I stood at that window and watched the orchard for a while, the way I do most mornings, and I did not feel like a woman about to detonate anything. I felt like a woman finally doing paperwork that was 11 months overdue. By 11 that morning, the second letter went out, this one to the mortgage company holding the note on Ryan and Claire's condominium, informing them, factually and without commentary, that a personal loan I had co-signed for them 2 years earlier, at Claire's request, just until Ryan's promotion came through, was being called due under its original terms, which had always specified repayment or my written extension. I had extended it twice already, quietly, without being asked to, out of exactly the kind of love that gets mistaken for a bottomless account. I did not extend it a third time. That wasn't even the worst thing the debt was tied to, but that's a conversation for later in this story. By that afternoon, my phone had become something I no longer recognized as mine. Claire, 12:04 p.m. Mom, what did you do? Priya just called me crying. Claire, 12:41 p.m. Call me right now. Ryan, 1:15 p.m. Margaret, this is insane. You're going to ruin the wedding over a text message? Deborah, 1:52 p.m. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this is exactly the kind of instability I was worried about. Claire, 2:30 p.m. The venue coordinator says we have to relocate in 9 days. Do you understand what you're doing to me? Ryan, 3 p.m. Also, the bank called about the loan. What is happening? Claire, 3:47 p.m. I don't even recognize you right now.
Claire, 4:15 p.m. Mom, please just call me. Deborah, 4:40 p.m. This family has clearly never had proper boundaries, and now it's coming out sideways at the worst possible time. Ryan, 5:10 p.m. Margaret, please, I'm asking you as calmly as I can. Please undo this. Claire, 5:22 p.m. Priya says the florist won't even confirm without a new signed venue agreement. Do you understand what a chain reaction is? Deborah, 5:38 p.m. I've hosted 6 weddings in this family and never once seen anything like this. Claire, 5:51 p.m. This isn't hosting, Deborah, it's owning. There's a difference. God. Claire, 6:02 p.m. Fine, don't come to the wedding then. See if I care. I read every message. I answered none of them that day. I let the phone sit face down on the counter, buzzing every so often like something alive and stunned, while I made myself a very ordinary dinner and ate it at my own table, in my own quiet kitchen, in the house Walter left me, on the land his grandfather planted, and I did not feel a single ounce of the guilt I had spent 31 years assuming I was supposed to feel in this exact situation. I want to be honest with you. It wasn't triumph either. It was something quieter than that. Something closer to relief.
The relief of finally being seen, even in anger, after a year of being written out of the guest list of my own life. 2 days later, the messages changed shape. That's usually how it goes. The anger runs its first lap, and then it starts looking for someone to blame that isn't itself. Ryan's sister, a woman I'd met exactly twice, sent me a message that began, "I don't normally get involved," but ended 4 paragraphs later having gotten thoroughly involved. An aunt of Ryan's I had never met at all left a voicemail informing me that some people don't understand what family sacrifice looks like. My own sister, who lives 3 states away and hadn't called me in 8 months, phoned to ask with real concern in her voice whether I'd had some kind of episode. I hadn't had an episode. I'd had a year of small cuts, and then I'd had a Thursday in a cereal aisle. The messages kept coming in waves, the way weather does. A burst, then a lull, then another burst, timed to whatever new logistical wall they'd hit. Priya called again to say the barn at a neighboring farm had agreed to host on 9 days' notice for triple the rate, and that Claire had asked through Priya, not directly, whether I would at least consider covering the difference, given everything. I declined, politely, and asked Priya to stop relaying financial requests on Claire's behalf. She apologized and said she understood. That night, I got the call I'd known, somewhere quiet inside myself, was eventually coming. It was almost 11 when the phone rang, and it wasn't a text this time. It was Claire's voice, and it wasn't angry anymore. It was small in a way I hadn't heard since she was 7 years old and scared of the dark. "Mom," she said, "I need you to explain something to me, because none of this makes sense unless you're doing it to hurt me on purpose, and I need to know if that's true." I told her it wasn't about hurting her. It was about being told, in 4 words, exactly where I stood, and deciding that from now on, I would only stand in rooms where I was actually wanted. She didn't have much to say to that. We agreed, in the flat, careful way people agree to things at 11 at night when they're both too tired to keep fighting, to meet in person before the wedding, not after. We met on a Sunday at the orchard because I wasn't going to have this conversation anywhere else. Claire came alone. That mattered to me more than she probably realized. She stood in the kitchen doorway the way she used to stand there as a teenager, working up to something. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said. "I thought you'd be upset, and then you'd get over it, like you always do." "I always did," I agreed. That was the problem. Deborah said, I know what Deborah said. I heard some of it myself in the cereal aisle at Fenwick's 2 Thursdays ago, about how I'm not really a wedding person, about how the land is basically Ryan's problem to figure out once you're married, about how I'm 70 and I'll want help with it eventually, so you should all just be patient. Claire went very pale. "I never said that." "You said the first part, the not a wedding person part. Deborah told you it was working out, and you didn't correct her. She didn't argue with that. That, more than anything, told me she couldn't. I kept my voice level. Short sentences, no raised anything. How much of this wedding did I pay for, Claire? That's not fair, you offered. How much rent has anyone in that family ever paid me for standing on my land for every holiday for 6 years? She didn't answer that one either. I'm not asking these questions to punish you, I said. I'm asking because I think somewhere in the last year, you started believing that love from me was just going to keep arriving, no matter how it was treated. Free rent, forever, on a piece of property nobody bothered to remember had a name on it. Mine. She was crying by then, quietly, the way I taught her to cry, without the loud kind of unraveling I'd never once let myself do in front of her. "I got the venue apology," she said. "From Deborah, actually. She said if I want to send it, she has an email from the pastor's assistant confirming the officiant never should have." She stopped. "It doesn't matter. I know that's not the point." "The apology's in the wrong order," I said. "She's sorry about the optics, not the harm. Apologies in the wrong order aren't apologies. They're negotiations." Claire looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face went from defensive to civilly tired, the way it does when a person finally stops arguing a case they know they've lost. "I don't know how to fix this before Saturday," she said. "You can't," I told her. "Saturday isn't the thing that needs fixing. I want you to know I didn't leave her standing there with nothing. I'm not a woman who confuses justice with cruelty, and I never was." Before she left that afternoon, I told her that Hazel, her daughter, my granddaughter, 9 years old and the one person in this entire year who never once stopped calling me every Sunday, already had a small trust waiting for her 12th birthday, set up quietly the year Walter died, untouched by any of this and never going to be. I told Claire the door to this kitchen was not locked. It just wasn't going to open itself for people who'd never bothered to knock. Before she reached the truck, she turned back once. "Did Dad ever say anything about the land? Like what he would have wanted if he'd seen any of this coming?" I told her the truth. I told her about the letter, the one in the box with his watch and his glasses, the one that told me to keep my name on the deed and my name in the room. I didn't read it to her. Some things a daughter has to be given at the right hour, not the convenient one. But I told her it existed, and that her father had known, even 2 years before he died, that a day like this one might come, and that he trusted me to know exactly what to do when it did. Claire's face did something complicated when I said that. Grief and relief arriving at the same time, the way they sometimes do. "He always did see things before the rest of us," she said. "He did," I agreed. "It's why I still listen to him." She left without saying much else. I didn't expect her to. The wedding happened 9 days later, at the neighboring farm, at triple the rate, without me, without the barn my husband's grandfather built, without the mowed field or the trimmed hedges I'd spent all spring maintaining for free. I heard, secondhand, that it was a lovely ceremony. I believe that. Claire always did have good taste when she was given the room to use it honestly. I did not attend, but I did, in my own way, appear. At 4 o'clock that Saturday, the hour Priya's original timeline, the one I'd been copied on months earlier and never quite forgot, had listed as the start of cocktail hour, a certified letter arrived at the new venue, addressed to Claire, delivered by a courier I'd arranged weeks in advance to time it exactly there. Inside was not anger. There was no anger left in me by then. Inside was the deed to 2 acres of the orchard, the 2 acres with the old apple trees Walter's grandfather planted first, the ones Claire used to climb as a girl, transferred fully into her name, no strings, no conditions, effective that day, and a single handwritten line, in my own hand, at the bottom of the cover page. I never stopped being your mother. I just stopped attending things I wasn't invited to. I'm told she read it in the hallway outside the reception, alone, and didn't come back to the head table for 11 minutes. Priya told me later, when she called to let me know the ceremony had gone smoothly despite everything, that Claire came back to the reception with her makeup redone and her chin up, and danced the first dance like nothing at all had happened. I believe that too. My daughter was raised by a woman who spent 34 years learning how to keep her composure in a room full of people watching for a crack. Some lessons get inherited whether you mean to pass them down or not. I don't know what she felt in those 11 minutes. I only know what I felt, standing in my own kitchen at 4 o'clock that same afternoon, 100 yards from the barn nobody used that day. Still. Not sad. Not victorious. Still. The way a lake is still, once whatever's been thrown into it finally settles all the way to the bottom. It's been 4 months now. Claire and I speak most weeks. Not the way we used to. That version of us, the one built on my silence and her assuming it, isn't coming back, and I've made peace with that. What we have now is smaller and much more honest. She asked me in October if she could bring Hazel out to the orchard to pick apples the way she used to as a girl, and I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Deborah and I have not spoken since the wedding, and I expect we never will again, and I have found I am entirely at peace with that as well. Some relationships were never mine to save. They were only ever mine to stop subsidizing. Ryan sent a card, eventually, in November. 3 lines, awkward, clearly written without his mother standing over his shoulder for once. It wasn't much. It was, I think, the first honest thing that man has ever said to me. I put it in the drawer in the hall table, the one where I keep things that matter but don't need to be looked at every day. Not the trash, the drawer. I sold the Far Barns old catering rights to a young couple starting a farm-to-table business 2 towns over. A small thing, but it felt right, handing that particular building over to people who'd actually ask before they used it. The check from that sale sits in an envelope in the same drawer as Ryan's card. Not spent yet, not needed yet, just there, the way security is supposed to feel, quiet and entirely mine to decide about. Hazel comes every other Sunday now, sometimes with Claire, sometimes on her own once Claire trusted the drive. 2 weeks ago she asked me, picking apples in the 2 acres that are legally hers now, whether I was still mad at her mom. I told her I was never mad at her mother. I was just done being invisible in her mother's house. Hazel thought about that for a long moment, the way 9-year-olds do when they're turning something over that's slightly too big for them. And then she said, "That's not mean, that's just true." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. I laughed for the first time in a long time that didn't have anything sad folded underneath it. I think about that cereal aisle sometimes, and the woman who stood in it, not putting a box of oatmeal back on the shelf, so much as putting an entire year back where it belonged. I don't regret a single letter I sent. I don't regret the deed, or the loan, or the quiet Saturday afternoon I spent alone in a kitchen that was, for the first time in a long while, entirely and only mine. People ask me sometimes if I'd do it differently, given the chance. I tell them no. I'd only do it sooner. That's not cruelty. That's honesty with a handle. And if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. You do not have to raise your voice to be heard. You do not have to slam a door to close it. Sometimes the loudest thing a woman can do is simply stop showing up for people who never once made room for her and let the silence do the arithmetic they refuse to do themselves. I wrote one line in my notebook the night after the wedding, the same notebook I've kept since Walter died, the one with a closing thought at the end of every hard year. It said, "Immediate family isn't the people who put your name on a list. It's the people who never needed to." And that night, for the first time in 11 months, I slept the way a woman sleeps when she finally stops waiting for a door that was never going to open and starts building a house with better ones.